Hi, welcome to the Metaverse. Not the actual Metaverse, fortunately, but a panel called the Metaverse here at the Women in Games Conference. My name is Rebecca Valentine. I'm a reporter with IGN, and I'm here with three wonderfully talented and smart women who have very smart thoughts about the Metaverse. And we're going to have a chat today about what it is, what it's all about, why we should care, and what we should all be thinking about in regards to this big, scary new thing that's emerging. So before we start, let's meet our panel. We have Asha Easton, who leads Immerse UK. Asha, tell us something about yourself and what you do.
Great, thanks Rebecca, and thanks for inviting me to this panel. So I lead Immerse UK, which is the UK's VR and AR professional network. We're part of a larger organization called KTN, and we work to help to grow the immersive tech ecosystem in the UK to help make it a bit less fragmented and to help facilitate cross-sector innovation. So we're also working to help industries that are adopting the technology to do so. And so we work across all sectors that are impacted by the technology.
Awesome, thank you so much, Asha. Next we have Ash Richter, who is a senior technology architect for In-Q-Tel. Hi, Ash.
Hi everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Ash Richter. I'm many bizarre combo pack of things. An archaeologist, a technology anthropologist, an engineer, and right now I lead, after various misadventures, sort of doing Indiana Jones with laser scanning throughout the world, building these multimodal mixed reality data systems. I've ended up leading investment strategies for everything from geospatial technologies and gaming through to spatial computing in this wonderful new realm that we're dubbing the Metaverse, for In-Q-Tel, which is the venture capital group that was set up 20 years ago to support the Central Intelligence Agency, yes, that CIA, and all of the other three-letter agencies that handle national security for the US, as well as their counterparts abroad in allied nations like the United Kingdom and Australia. Really nice to be here, and thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Ash. And finally, we have Michaela Mantegna, who tells me she is known as Abogamer, which is a pun on lawyer and gamer in Spanish. Michaela, how's it going?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me in this panel. And it's so hilarious that I fight technology in real life, and now I'm fighting to get my camera on. But so I will have to listen to your wonderful voices and stay away from the video. As you were saying, I'm a lawyer by training, and I am a co-founder of Women in Games Argentina. It's a collective of women working towards a more diverse industry. And I'm also a research and activist on digital rights. Actually, I'm an affiliate at the Bergman Klein Center at Harvard, and I'm doing research on video game policy, and particularly in all the space of the XR and the Metaverse.
That's wonderful. Well, it's really good to have the three of you here. And now we get to, I think, maybe the scariest part of the whole thing. Who wants to tackle just defining the Metaverse for everybody?
I'll give it a shot. So the way I view it is it's the next iteration of the internet built by game developers, effectively. Ideally, the metaverse would always be live and persistent, so always with planned and spontaneous events always occurring. It would span and operate across all platforms and into the real world, would have no cap on audience, and would have its own fully the metaverse would be. And ladies, if you have other thoughts on that, I welcome them.
I have a more pessimistic view, maybe, because I think that we can agree that that was maybe our definition of the metaverse, but now everyone is claiming that the metaverse is already in existence, and everyone is trying to define it to fit their own ecosystems. So I agree that we need interoperability, we need openness, but nowadays there is a kind of a very loose definition of what a metaverse is, and I'm super glad to have in this panel so we can kind of schedule back into what should be and what it really is, because as Rebecca said in another conversation, now we have a definition of a bunch of white dudes about what the metaverse is and should be. So it's amazing to have such wonderful women in this conversation talking about their own expertise on that.
it's such a good point about that we're seeing everybody try to define it in the context of their own ecosystems, because I think that's absolutely one of the big worries I have right now about things moving forward with the metaverse concepts, is that everyone's fighting. Is it augmented reality? Is it virtual reality? And to Asha's point earlier, it's more the next computing paradigm. It's all of these things. It's both of these things. It's omnipresent across these things. I like to think of it as digitization writ large, the digitization of our physical world, creating 3D replicas of everything as it exists live, constant tracking, and then being able to utilize everything in game worlds on top of that, and kind of go vice versa both ways, both in terms of like everything from the virtual environments and physical environment mashup to the virtual and physical different versions of ourselves mashing up and interconnecting and things like that. So I think as we're seeing everybody literally duke it out, like after SIGGRAPH a couple weeks ago, like Niantic like had a whole like, that's not the metaverse, this is the metaverse kind of shenanigans. But I think it's the theory of everything in a sense, which makes it daunting to even try to define, but it's there. It's that interoperability piece is key.
So can we dig into that a little bit, actually, because I think if people are hearing about the metaverse so far, they are hearing about it in terms of these things that already exist. You mentioned Niantic. I know we've heard, is Roblox the metaverse? Is Fortnite the metaverse? Is Minecraft the metaverse? Just along all these different companies trying to weigh in. Can we dig in a little bit more for folks as to, you know, what elements of these things kind of maybe resemble what the metaverse might be, and what makes them not what you're talking about?
I can go here with a provocation, because what is the difference between the metaverse and virtual worlds? Because some definitions that are taking, and some companies are taking a definition of their own metaverse that doesn't differ to a virtual world. It's like a metaverse should be kind of encompassing different environments and worlds. And what we are seeing now is like everyone is claiming that they have their own metaverse, and what in reality they have is like a very very nuanced parcel of the internet.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say that, you know, maybe within Roblox or Fortnite or one of those games, you can port around and do different things within that one space. But for me, the metaverse would be being able to port between all of those games without having to log in separately to each one, and port my digital assets from one game to the next, and then into all my professional worlds and personal worlds. That for me would be an actual open metaverse, as opposed to just, I would not consider just one of those things to be personally the metaverse.
Same. I almost think that some of the best examples we have right now of things that are edging towards a metaverse writ large are actually either more the social media platforms themselves, Twitch, or the Facebook login interface, where you're logging into everything from this one central account. But more so Twitch being able to kind of move you across these game worlds, jump in, jump out, meet different people in different spaces, cross over your avatars from physical, like sometimes you're meeting people and you have their name in Twitch, their name in Discord, and then their name if you know them in real life, and it's all over the place. But I think even more than that, there's examples in the physical world of places that are crossing over and bringing the digital elements into them and letting you jump through systems in a physical environment. I think you're seeing that with museums and tourism sites and airports, even like these places that are pulling together all of these digital components to let you hop around, play games in these landscapes, communicate with all sorts of different layers of information. And they're agnostic. While the places that are there, it's not tied to one company or another. And I think that that's going to be one of the scary things with the companies claiming now that they are the metaverse. The point of the metaverse is that it's letting you move through, like Asha said.
Yeah. And you had an interesting question, Rebecca, about ownership, like who should own it? And I believe it should be owned by the players, or us, as it were. It should be, our identity should be decentralized and secure and not owned by any one company. In an ideal world, ideal vision.
Yeah, say more, everyone. Who should own the metaverse, or why should no one own it?
I hard agreement to Asha, like absolutely. I think I'm mildly obsessed with this concept of like self-sovereign identity. Right now, our data systems are so tied to third parties. we don't even have access to our own individual everything. You want to pull together a report on you or apply for a visa or a driver's license. You're pulling data from here, data from here, data from here. The big thing that we're seeing out of the gaming industry first ahead of everybody is centralization of that around your avatars. Or I've seen one company refer to them as this move toward the digital soul, where your digital soul talks to all of the different versions of you and brings together everything from your gaming assets and skins and accessories and things that you're winning in games through to your real life shopping habits and pulling that all together. But I think it would mean a really cool data flip in terms of data ownership, not just for everybody in the gaming space, but writ large, because we really didn't plan the internet or digital anything right over the last, less than 40 years we've had this system. After 220,000 years of existence, we didn't think it through, and there's an opportunity here to rethink this and re-architect something really cool, or entirely dystopian the hell out of it. We'll see.
I can just ask the digital souls. Did you hear that from Crucible, Ash? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They're an excellent startup, doing some really interesting work around this and trying to create kind of like the layer that will enable like a product that can integrate into any gaming account and then create like a decentralized network of avatars with secure wallets, to port your assets from game to game, which is what we're talking about. And also create like a new economy where, players can also then, they've created something called like a direct to avatar business model, which will enable people to actually, sell directly to avatars and avoid like the physical, supply chain issues. It's a really interesting company. I've been following them since the beginning. I'm actually one of their advisors. Yeah.
I think the ownership question, because I agree with both of you about that we need a very to think through this and agree on a decentralized version of this, because we have people talking that the metaverse is like this next iteration of gaming and gaming platforms mash up with the internet. And we have two very different business models colliding there, because we have the internet was built on open standards, and we know that that freedom that we had in the governance of the internet in mid-90s kind of shaped the way that we shared information today. And another thing that for me is critical, and Ash was talking about this, is like the real ownership, because one of the things I heard like a lot of times in these GDC years conferences is like true ownership. The metaverse is allowing you to have true ownership of your assets. And that's for me is a premise that is not, we are not totally there, because from a legal standpoint, you are merely transferring things within an ecosystem. While you don't have when you don't have the ability to take one thing to another part of the ecosystem, that's no true ownership. And one of the things we are seeing with the NFTs and this growing ecosystem that also has a huge impact on our environment is like we are creating these things, but we are not giving away the rights, the underlying intellectual property rights on them. So for me, there's still kind of this unresolved issue going on with ownership that we need to pay attention to, because there is a lot of money involved and a lot of people is going to get burned with this.
That's a really good point. And we've not even seen that play out even in media forms that we've had for ages. Like everybody's still arguing over remixing content and copyright issues and what these things are. So we don't even have a good template, basically, sounds like.
And also, if we add up to this mix, because you were talking about data, and one of the things that for me is super concerning, and going to one of Rebecca's question, that what should be afraid of this conception of the metaverse, is like how our data and our biometric data is going to be used, because we are surrounded by sensors, we are surrounded by metrics, and we already know like the mess up ecosystem that AI ethics is. Artificial intelligence is everywhere, and we know that how this data is being used is still a very nuanced and debate question. So we are kind of taking away these kind of the worst things that we are debating on AI ethics and taking into the metaverse without consideration, with the particularity that it's a very immersive media So it has a huge impact, a very close impact, more than can be with this buffer that you have within you and your devices.
It's surveillance data. We kind of had
surveillance economy.
But earlier, it's surveillance writ large on an unprecedented scale of everyone knowing everything about you. And while it could equal like such insanely cool optimization of our systems, especially in terms of our population numbers, like that's anthropologically speaking, like the big factor in being able to even deal with like a global scale government, or that nebulous concept we may never reach of world peace. It implies having enough information about everybody to actually like get people engaged in a democratic system, ideally democratic version of world peace and international government. Like there's some great things that could happen from this level of surveillance data, but we're already seeing even lesser versions of that always being misused historically and already writ large right now in terms of the sort of crossover spaces between smart cities and spatial computing and the metaverse moving into these things. So you're right. It's potentially very, very scary.
I just want to flag, because I feel like it's of interest to us and probably to the audience as well, this topic of privacy and safety protection. So within KTN, they actually started a safety tech innovation network that's working with the government. They actually have like a big focus on that, because safety tech is a big actually industry for the UK, which is growing about like 40% each year. And the gaming sector is something that they're like scoping out, working with right now. And I've been trying to push the immersive, specific, and metaverse agenda, which I think is a bit future thinking even for that group. But I agree with you that it's something that we should think about well in advance, so we don't hit the same kind of problems that we've been seeing with technology we already have.
I guess to that point, Asha, and to maybe bring something that Ash also brought up earlier, what needs to happen now and in the next few years in order to make sure that when we do eventually get to this metaverse, we have a place that is safe, is open, is decentralized, is accessible to everyone, is not stealing all of our data? Because I mean, I've been covering, I guess, for example, I'm based in the United States, but I've been covering the Epic and Apple trial lately, and just looking at that, I mean, we still can't really come up with a definition of a video game that the courts can agree upon. And as Ash said earlier, there's all these questions about copyright and ownership and privacy and all these things that we can't figure out. We are so far away, regulation-wise, over here at least, from being able to make definitive rules about what a metaverse could be. I wonder who. Trusting individual companies to just be nice about it and play fair is maybe a little scary.
It's bad, and I think it's going to get worse. And I think the slow roll and bureaucracy, especially with respect to the court case, I mean, it took them forever even to decide, like imagery wise, when photographs, X-rays, what was evidence, what was not evidence. It took decades over the last century and a half to decide that in the courtrooms. We don't have time for that, to be perfectly honest. But I do think we are seeing, like, in terms of templates around the world, I always feel like I feel like I'm like a weird advocate for Australia these days, just because I'm so intrigued with how they're handling digitization and the interplay of their digital systems. Like it sounds like they're going to be one of the first rolling out like a COVID passport kind of scenario that actually deals with that at a tech level. They already have these amazing internal systems for dealing with just your basic like government data of you and your health data that have protocols and things. It's not exactly GDPR, but it's GDPR plus these additional things. And I think that this is a good democratic template, because otherwise we are seeing the more authoritarian variants coming out of China itself. So it's a lot. I think a lot of it's bureaucracy, a lot of it's cultural, and I think we're moving too slow, to be perfectly honest. Because I do. Oh, Asha, you're on.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say that, and because I do definitely agree with you that the laws move too slow around things, and we're moving way too fast. In order to make this as open and accessible as possible, I think it's really important that we have as many diverse voices involved in the creation of it as possible. And whether that be like in those different companies or, building through startups like Crucible, or that are trying to work on like the infrastructure of the stuff. The more diversity we have in the actual building of it, the better, I think, from the outset.
I want to touch on Ash's points about the laws moving too slow, and that's very true, because the moment that you are trying to debate on something and trying to agree, because the law tries to regulate future conducts, and we are now dealing with past, because we cannot catch up. Regulation cannot catch up with what is happening with technology. And my fear is, as you also were talking about China, is that there is a lot of people that doesn't have the capability to do their own research, or so they are resorting, at least, and I can speak from this from the Global South perspective, they are resorting to already built solutions that maybe doesn't come from democratic countries. So I have seen a lot of these artificial intelligence particularly, that people is trying to create solutions and copy solutions that came from China. And this is very scary for me, because if you don't have like a very strong technological ecosystem, you're going to resort to stay in the race, to copy and to build and to have third-party solutions that maybe doesn't adjust to your necessities. So for me, this is kind of very scary to see from our perspective from the globe.
I think this also loops around to the diversity point too, because I think this sort of fear of that they're not moving enough, they're going to reuse things they're seeing elsewhere. I think it's also part and parcel of why the current conversations aren't as diverse as they should be. Everyone's just reusing a lot of the tech pieces or a lot of the things. I see this a lot in the back and forth between which companies are geospatial, which are mixed reality. Like a lot of the mixed reality companies are like, we'll invent geographic information systems. And we're like, you don't need to do that. Here are these other pieces, or you could come up with something. Like there's either reinventing the wheel, not knowing the wheel already existed, or there's poor reuse of the wheels and making square wheels. I think part and parcel of there not being enough voices in the room to either bring in extant knowledge of here's what's available and here's what an actual bump up would be, an actual new thing in this space. And I think a lot of that is, and I'm going to shame the international innovation ecosystem, it's not as diverse as it should be. I mean, the percentage of female-led companies that are getting startup funding in the venture capital community, it's low. It's less than 30% of all companies are women-led. Similar for like these numbers are really, really scary still, very much tending towards white males. Younger white males, but younger versus older isn't necessarily diversity. But I think that is almost still, I mean, it shouldn't be an issue. It's 2021 and yet still very much a daily issue.
While we're still being cautionary, I do kind of want to circle back to a question I've actually already asked, because we do believe it seems like the consensus on this panel is that this metaverse should be decentralized, but there does seem to need to be somebody, not some individual, but some kind of governing thing over it, like something in charge to make sure it is working effectively. I'm thinking a lot about content moderation, right? Because the internet is a giant mess and people are unsafe constantly. And so we've talked about privacy concerns, we've talked about legal concerns, but I wonder too, who is in charge of just general safety in an ideal metaverse? Who makes sure that if someone is causing problems in this space, they are removed? And can they really be removed, right? Because this is sort of the next generation of the internet. You can't really just remove someone from the internet entirely, right? Like what does this look like in your minds?
I definitely don't have the answer to that. Completely, I don't think anyone does necessarily, but I would hope that, I know there's lots of, decent AI-driven services that are available, to help protect against toxicity online. I don't know which ones of those could be plugged in a way that could oversee an entire metaverse, but I mean, somebody needs to build that. But I still don't think that it should be one company that owns it all. Maybe it's like a collective of these services that all do it. I don't know how, but I don't know what ladies think.
I don't know. I think that it doesn't exist yet and someone needs to build it is a perfectly effective answer. I don't feel that the internet currently has good safety tools, and I wish someone would build them myself.
I'd like to see some sort of like the Wikipedia model, but somehow with organized sub entities that are maybe the corporations, like some way to essentially crowdsource regulatory policy. But even Wikipedia, we've seen trend towards it often being white males as the editors. So I think it's not there yet, but we can hope that it will get built.
I think we can borrow from the internet, from our experience with the internet, that there is a very nice quote about that you don't know how it flies, but it still flies, because the internet is working and you don't know who is making things to make it work, and still the infrastructure is there and you're using it. And there is a model of governance that is called the multi-stakeholder, that you have like a very different representation from private sector, from academia, from the public sector. And I think we should think about building governance models based on this kind of participatory table where everyone has a seat and has a say about this, and trying to not replicate the same mistakes that we are having. You were talking about content moderation, and now it's a mess, because the laws that were put in place, like Section 230, to kind of allow the ecosystem of internet to grow, are now kind of backfiring. But at the same time, it's like a double-edged sword, because the same law that is protecting your freedom of expression online is being abused in another context. And you have like this very strong tension between like the old media and the newspapers, and the new media and internet and the internet companies. So it's like a very hot ball of mess, like the dumpster fire situation that we should try to avoid to replicate in the metaverse.
Total hypothetical here, but imagine there was some kind of like play to earn model in the metaverse where your participation in it, gains you rewards, but then by some other measure, poor behavior in it could mean losing some of those rewards. I don't know how on earth that would be monitored, but it's just a thought.
I like the notion of gamifying the gamification.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I was thinking about this game from Microsoft about pirates that tried to do this kind of governance model that everyone was on the ship, and the first thing that appeared is like people started to abuse the system and throw in the treasure of board, and they couldn't jail the people that was doing this. And we know what griefers have been done in the history of gaming. So it's a very dangerous model to have.
So we talked about both the ideals and the pitfalls of what this eventually looks like. But I want to go back a little bit to where we are now. We've kind of talked about some things that are not the metaverse that exists right now, but I guess what is the trajectory of this? Is this something that you all foresee we see in our lifetimes? Is this something in 5 years, 10 years? When do we get something that looks like a metaverse?
I hope it's within our lifetimes. I think it's probably not that far off. But I think we still have like quite a long way to go, especially if you consider the fact that, even in big, the Fortnites of the world, or maybe like a VR chat or something like that, where you can only have, 50 to 100, 200, I'm not sure what the number's at these days, of players in a particular instance. We just don't have the capability right now to have millions of people in one instance. And that I would consider something like that to be ideally where we'd get to with the metaverse, and the tech's just not there yet. So it's definitely not something that's going to happen overnight.
Also, I'm not sure where to start. I have. Oh, sorry, Michaela, do you want to go?
No, go ahead.
I'm always hesitant to do this, but there's a doom and gloom scenario here too, where in terms of extinction events for humans, there are so many in front of us right now, like so many. Not just, climate crisis is only one of them. Like soil issues is something actually kind of separate. Water shortage also kind of separate but related. on top of nuclear threats, and like there's so many things that equal we have a couple of decades to science and technology our way out of it. This concept of a communal place where we're actually communicating, playing, kind of like organizing everything basically, ourselves, our entities, and for play, for work, because that's also I think a big component of it. I think this is one of those really interesting pathways of being Matt Damon in The Martian and sci-tech our way out of it. But I worry that towards the tech challenges we still have to face, there needs to be more support to go into ramping up how quickly we can develop those things, overcome the power issues, the shard issues, like actually move forward on these issues. But I worry that culturally we don't respect gaming as much as we should, even though it's one of the biggest financial markets out there. It's one of the biggest purveyors of culture in our time, and yet it's often still seen as, maybe this is just more so in American culture than anywhere else, but it's still seen as this niche thing for kids, or it's something over here, or something like it's looked down on in a really weird way, despite the fact that the core pieces of technology of it are what's fueled even our conference right now, or most of like the things everybody's doing to get through COVID and the pandemic and move towards remote work. Even many work-related tools have origins in gaming tech. So it's I think a cultural issue. It's an issue of money and innovation focus. But I think if everybody was actually geared towards let's solve this problem and build a system, we could do it, and we could see it in our lifetime. And I would posit that one of the big early steps would be something the kind of the augmented reality cloud piece of it, crossing over gaming and that. So annotate all the game landscapes, annotate the physical world, and actually have all of that be useful training data, 3D computer vision kind of jam. Early indicator, I think, if we're going to get it soon, that'll be the thing that pops up. Fingers crossed. Michaela,
I agree with you on this, and I hope that we are seeing in our lifetimes. I know that there are Star Trek fans in the room, so I'm thinking about this kind of not only having a metaverse, but a metaverse that is for everyone, because we have to solve not only the tech to have a metaverse, but only the tech to have accessibility for everyone to this, from having internet connections, and that I'm coming from this with my perspective from the global south, and I'm thinking how ironic is that today all my tech failed and my internet connection failed, so I can't connect in the same playing field that everyone here. And I'm thinking that we should have like meaningful access in terms that not only considering different capabilities and people with disabilities, but also considering these different access in tech, and people that is going to get the best tech to access, and people that would barely scrap some hardware to get into this. So for me, that is another concern, that even if we are going to have this soon, it's going to be like a niche experience for some, and that is not like a real metaverse. And going back to Star Trek, it's like we are kind of thinking about the metaverse, about this utopia of unlimited resources and replicators, but at the same time, we are creating artificial scarcity, because we are talking about tokenization and creating NFTs and trying to take this digital capability of replication and put it back in terms of this analog scarcity. So for me, these are issues that we should consider when talking about the upcoming metaverse.
I hope I think I'm understanding this right, but it's sort of weird, Ash, what you're suggesting. It is a doom and gloom scenario, but at least specifically in terms of the metaverse, it seems like it would almost be the ideal way for this to come about, right? Like ideally, we would have a bunch of world leaders and people who are knowledgeable and caring about issues that impact everyone, developing this with the purpose of coming to the table to solve problems. And then that way, that infrastructure is there as a baseline once we all start to come into it and use it for things that are not solving immediate drastic problems, right? Like that seems to me to be a better baseline than a bunch of companies fighting over money.
One would hope so, but I think we've rarely seen that kind of international effort, except during but to your point, that's exactly why we would do this. But it's also an interesting one where the solution is also the solution, where like building it creates the data that could potentially like alleviate a lot of the problem. So it's sort of this weird circular thing. But to Michaela's point too, it's also, she's so right. We're building it still off of everyone's interested in it now because it's an economic driver. But it just means we're looking at this almost as a replicatable new variant of capitalism, when Star Trek itself, the big premise there's no money in Star Trek. I think they never really super emphasize it, but there's no money in Star Trek. And it's sort of a push towards a different form of like a knowledge economy, if you will. And we don't necessarily know, I think, how to get there, even if it is our sci-fi dreams. And I will say this about our species: we've managed as humankind to do that over and over again. We've been dreaming of the tech that we have today for thousands of years, and we built it. The problem right now is we don't have thousands of years, which again, super scary. Sorry, guys, but those are the stats. But I think this is something that could pull everybody together into having conversations about it. I think we saw that recently with like over the last fortnight to the great like climate change extravaganza. We're seeing more and more scientists and nonprofits and even governments kind of trying to figure out how to engage in these gaming communities and turn it into a conversation space, a space to educate different generations and pull them together to look at these issues. So I think there's some really cool early indicators there that this could be a thing.
So for me, average person who is not developing the metaverse, does not have a pile of money I can use to fund the metaverse, is not in the government and cannot make policy about the metaverse, not a scientist, just a person. Like what should I be thinking about as I'm looking around and seeing metaverse-like things pop up all over the place? What should I be worried about? What should I be thinking about as I potentially engage with them years down the road?
I think something really, just I know we're talking about, Ash, the no money in the metaverse potentially, but to people should be thinking about the fact that this could create like an entire new economy. It'll create entire new types of jobs and opportunities, actually. And maybe it's nice to, I know we're getting to the end, to end on a positive note, that would offer, lots of new opportunities to people who, don't have as much access. So it could be
short-term and long-term. Like, that's so true.
Yeah.
I would go with the gloom and doom scenario, sorry. But I would be aware of where you put your money, where you put your data, and where you put your time on this. Because one of the things for me is super concerning is that a lot of people is going into crypto and going into NFTs. And there are people like buying invisible rocks going around. So, and people follow these people because like money follows money. So I think like for the average person that is maybe not so into this, just be careful with all the promises and take it with a pinch of salt.
And I think for me, I feel like I'm somewhere in between, because I'm like doom and gloom, but also, it could be so good. And I think right now the best thing everybody can do is to just engage in these communities writ large. Like, make sure you're playing and talking with people around the world. Like, I think that's one of the coolest things that we already have from the sort of proto variants that we're getting out of the gaming industry, is this ability. Like, I get up early so that I can hang out with a guy I've never met in Portugal, and my partner in Australia, and we play Red Dead Online or City of Heroes, which, yes, you can mock me for, but it's still playable. And it's these conversations we're having while playing about world affairs, about the news, about mashing up these things, and about what everybody's seeing, what everybody's interested in. And I think that discourse is something we don't often have as much as we should have these days, despite the fact that we are far more connected than we ever have before. So I think the best thing everybody can do is just engage, be aware, be playing these games, talking to people, putting your thoughts out, hearing other people's thoughts, and just communicating. Because that's what it is. It's a big, grand communication system unlike we've never had before. We already have this version of it. What will the next version look like?
I love that encouragement to engage. I do want to jump back to what Asha and Michaela touched on, though, about being cautious about who and what we engage with. And I do kind of wonder, just as maybe I don't, not to end on something super depressing, but I guess is this inevitable? Like, are we eventually going to reach a point where we can't help but engage? Because I I mean, I know, again, I live in the United States. I engage with technology for a living, but I feel like the internet, I can't escape the internet, right? Like the internet is just all consuming, even if I'm not actively using my phone or sitting down at the computer. All the companies I buy things from and the buildings I go in, and basically everything that my life touches is somehow connected to this internet. The internet is just everywhere. Is eventually the metaverse going to be inevitable? Like no matter what, is whatever company ends up accidentally owning the metaverse going to just have my data no matter what I do about it?
Maybe not necessarily that, but you are talking to a bunch of early adopters. So I think we're all going to be big advocates for being early adopters. The earlier you start to research and learn about the stuff, even if it's not something that's, your day job, or, it's good to be ahead of the curve with these things. Understand like where it's coming from, and as Ash said, get involved in any way that you can, so you're not caught off guard.
And I think historically we've seen this pattern over and over of the adoption curve of tech like this. Even for some of the agencies, my favorite thing right now in DC is that all the restaurants have switched to QR code menus, so people have to use their smartphones to activate. Which, of course, for various agencies, they're like, no, we can't. And now they can't have food. They can't have lunch. Eventually you can't stick with your horse when the cars are there. Like it's just, we don't ride our horses to work anymore. Just like one day we might even not drive a car to work anymore. And I think there's an inevitability to that with the human species. Once we find something and we like it and it serves a purpose, it's unstoppable. I think we've seen that over with basic systems, the concept of writing, pens, technology we don't even think of as technology anymore. That's just embedded in our daily lives on top of the levels of technology that we do still think about as technology. Sorry to close that out with a weird anthropology note.
That's a great.
I totally agree, because I think technology is going to be not only pervasive, but it's going to be invisible, because it's going to be disappearing and you're going to be interacting without noticing that you're interacting. So I think we need like a legal and regulatory policy infrastructure that kind of allows you to go and transit these new virtual worlds with confidence that there is some architecture there that is protecting you, like data protection law, consumer protection law, because all of this not only is a matter of data, it's a matter of products. So we also have like intellectual property and consumer protection law in the mix. So I think that we need this kind of invisible but structural things to be able to walk this metaverse.
For sure. Really quick, we have a couple minutes left. We'll just end on a nice note. I would love to hear from each of you. What is something that would be in your ideal metaverse that you just think would be cool and fun and you're excited and you hope that it happens?
I love the cultural language aspect to this. Like the new, it's like the new semiotics. We have all these new pop culture formats. We've moved on from just a handful of books that we all have read to be able to say, what does the number 42 mean to you? And most people, like a huge chunk of people will be like, oh, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the meaning of everything. And game worlds and all these virtual worlds are these new places where we can spread all those symbolic languages and have that discord and identify each other within them, but also like open it up to everybody to communicate and to join them instead of it being exclusive.
For me, it would be like the relative size of the world is shrinking, and you can find a partner, a soul, a friend, whatever it is in the globe. And my ideal metaverse would be a Mass Effect metaverse. That's a given.
I mean, I would be most excited really to see like self-sovereign identity actually work out. I want what Crucible's building. Honestly, I'm not gonna lie. That's my dream. That's what I want. And to be able to play in photorealistic worlds as well. I know we're not like totally there yet either, but I'm very excited for graphics to get to that level. And I'd also be really excited to engage in a metaverse that's like built with that's completely accessible for all people, and like having like accessibility as kind of like a core of it being built. So that's kind of my thoughts.
Awesome. Well, I will hope for those ideals instead of all of the other baggage that we are worried about. thank you, all three of you, so much for taking the time to talk about this. I think it's really incredible that we got a group of people like this together to talk about the metaverse instead of the usual suspects that we hear gushing about it. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who came to our session. Thank you for listening, and we hope you'll stay tuned for all of the talks coming up next.